Okay, so this is a Cisco packet tracer activity, and we are supposed to build a switch and a router network. The addressing table over here you can see has been given to us, and by the end of the day, this completion, which is 0%, is supposed to be 100%. So when we move to the check results and we go to the assessment items tab, you see that everything is not correct here. So you can see that default gateway is not configured, IP address and all those things. So that's what you're about to do in this packet tracer activity, and hopefully it marks 100% completion. So let's start. So for the part one, we configure devices and we verify the connectivity. So we move to the steps, and you can see the steps are outlined here, and we follow the steps to see. So we connect PCA to our switch. So to connect, I go to my connections and I select copper straight through cable. So the reason for selecting copper straight through cable is that we are connecting unlike devices, PCA to a switch, a PC to a switch, and so the copper straight through cable is feasible in this regard. So I select my fast Ethernet 0 port as stated in the steps. Then I connect it to my switch. Then I connect that one also to the fast Ethernet 01 port. Alright. The next thing is to connect my switch to my router. Alright. Through so the same how do you call it, copper straight through cable. Then I connect my switch. The port I'm supposed to select is the gigabit port 01, and I connect to my router, and the interface that, or the port I'm supposed to select, is the 001 port. Alright, then I'm supposed to connect my router to my PCB. So the same cable, copper straight through cable, I connect my router here. I select the gigabit 000 interface and I connect it to PCB fast Ethernet port 0. Now that I'm finished with the first step, I move to the second step, which is assigning static IP information to the PC interface. So I'm to configure the IP address, subnet mark, and the default gateway settings on PCA. So I select my PCA over here and I move to the configure tab. So I can see default gateway over here. So I move to my addressing table to see the default gateway giving me. So my default gateway over here for PCA. So this is my PCA, and my default gateway is 192.168.1.1. So 192.168.1.1. Alright. Then I move to my fast Ethernet 0 section. Then I configure my IPv4 address and a subnet marks. Sorry. So the IPv4 address given us was for PCA is 192.168.1.3. So 192.168.1.3. Then we have a default subnet mark. Alright, so packet tracer gives us the default, which is, I think, it's very cool. Alright, so we are done and we just close this tab. As of now, our completion percentage is 22%, so I think we are doing very well. So we move to the second part, which is to configure the address, subnet marks, and the default gateway for PCB, similar to what we did for PCA. So we move to PCB and we select our configure tab. Okay, then we configure our default gateway. So the default gateway given to us in the addressing table for PCB, I think it's here, is it 192.168.0.1. so that's what we put here, 192.168.0.1. Then we move to our fast Ethernet 0 port. and configure our IPv4 address and a subnet mask. So our IPv4 address for PCB is 192.168.0.3. Then our subnet mask is the default one. All right, so I think we are done for that section. Okay, so as of now our completion is 30%. Okay, so the next thing to do here is to ping PCB from a command prompt window on PCA. So ping over here it's a networking command, so it's used together with the IPv4 address or the name of the destination host. All right, and we have something we call the divide and conquer with ping, where you either ping from wireless to a default gateway and all that. So at a later time we'll dive like deep down into it and we'll see what this ping command is. So from now I move to my PCA and I see whether if I ping PCB I will be able to reach the network. So I move to my desktop, I move to my command prompt. So I ping, then the IPv4 address of PCB. So PCB's IPv4 address is 192.168.0.3, and for now you see, let's see what it gives us. So at this pinging, I'm not sure it will be successful. All right, so request timeout, and let's see another request timeout. So obviously it's not going to be successful, right? It's not going to be successful because we've not yet the link between from PCA here to PCB here. You can see that there's this red indicating that there's a trouble somewhere. All right, so you can even use the trace route to see what we are talking about, but that's not the point here. All right, okay, so we verified that the pings were not successful, and we now know why. So the next thing is to configure the R1, which is our router over here, and so we are supposed to console into the router and enable privilege exec mode. All right, so they've given us a hint here to use console cable obviously and a terminal on the PC obviously. So we move to our connections and we select the console cable, which is over here, and we connect our console cable from PCA to the router. So PCA, we select our RS232, then we connect it to our router interface, which is the console interface. All right, then we move to our PCA. All right, then we move to our terminal. So we look at the terminal configuration and everything, we leave everything as default and okay over here. All right, so we press enter to get started. So I'm now in my router, but I'm supposed to enable privilege exec mode. All right, so I type in the command to enable privilege exec mode. All right, so now we are in privilege exec mode, denoted with the hash symbol over here. Okay, so the next thing to do is to enter configuration mode. Now to enter configuration mode, you type in the command configure terminal. All right, we obviously have a shortcut for it, but I'll just be typing the whole thing, configure terminal. All right, so now we've entered the configuration mode. The next thing to do is to assign a device name to the router according to the addressing table. So according to our addressing table, our router is R1. All right, so we change the name from this router we have here to R1. So what we do here is to type in the command, I think host name, then R1, and so this one will change the name from router here to R1. All right, then the next thing to do is to assign class as the privilege exec or privilege exec encrypted password. All right, so obviously we want security on our router, and so we have to do this. So we are assigning class as the password, and what we do here is to enable secret. That's the command we use, enable secret, and our password is class. So enable secret and our password, which is class over here. If you want to see the next or what we have to type, I can just put in the question mark here, the help, and you see that the level is set exec level password. So I put in my password, which is class, and that is it. Then the next thing is to assign Cisco as the console password and enable login. All right, so obviously the same thing, security reasons, and our line console also has to be secured. So the password they've given us to assign is Cisco, so obviously that's what we do. So now we move into our line console 0. All right, so you can see that this moved from config to config line, which shows that we are in the line console, or we are in a line interface. So our password is Cisco. Then we to enable login. All right, so once we are done, let's check our percentage. Our percentage is now 40%. Okay, which shows that we are doing well. The next thing here is to encrypt the plain text password. The reason why it's plain, it's, let's see if I'm to end this, and let me show the running config. If I'm to show the running config, okay, sorry, show running -config, you see that the password we just typed, you see here Cisco here, it's not encrypted. All right, so obviously we need to encrypt our password, and that's what this is about. Okay, so now that we've verified that the password is in plain text, let's move to our config mode. So config terminal. All right, so to encrypt the password, the command we use is the service password, I think -encryption. All right, so service password encryption is what will encrypt our password. All right, and now when I end this section again and I move to show running config, you see that our text or our password, it's now encrypted. So you see our line console 0, the password was Cisco, now it is now being encrypted. All right, so this thing is very, very useful when configuring or when building a router and a switch network. All right, so we move. The next thing is to create a banner that warns anyone accessing the device that unauthorized access is prohibited. Right, obviously we want to warn users from changing any configuration once they configure anything, or once they enter into the router. All right, so I move into my config. So let me move into the config mode, configure terminal. All right, so what I do here is that I type banner, so that's the keyword banner, and once I type in my help, I see that there's login, there's method, there's a message of the day banner. So that's what we are looking for. So banner message of the day, that's MOTD, and I type in my message of the day. So I start with a delimiter here, which is, let's say, hash symbol, and I say unauthorized access is prohibited. All right, then I just signal warning over here, and I end with the same delimiter. All right, or delimiter, whatever thing we want to say. All right, so I create my message of the day banner. The next thing is to configure the IP address according to the addressing table and activate both Ethernet interfaces on the router. All right, so my percentage completion is now 45%. All right. Okay, so now let's configure the address according to the addressing table. So we see that our router interface is the 001 and the 000 interface, and the IP address is here and the subnet marks it's also here. All right, so that's what we're about to do now. So I enter my interface. So interface, and I see that the gigabit interface is right here, and that's what we'll be using. So gigabit Ethernet. All right, then 000. So that's for the first one, and you see that it changes from config here to config if. That's the interface that we are on. All right, so we configure our IP address and the subnet mask. So we enter IP address. Our IP address is for the 000 interface. It's 192.168.0.1, and our subnet mark is 255. That's the default subnet mark, 255.255.0. all right, because it's supposed to follow that way, because if I type in IP address and I type the help command, you see that that's how it's supposed to be. So IP address is over here. All right, so that's for the gigabit Ethernet 0/0/0 interface. All right, so no shutdown. The reason why I'm doing the no shutdown is to change the state of the interface to up. All right, because we've configured it, and at the end of the day I have to also save the configuration, because that's what I normally do, save the configuration at each point. All right, so I end this section and I save. So to save, I just copy the running config into the startup config. All right, so that is what I do, so that I don't lose any changes that I have made. So I'll configure the interface for the second one. That's 0/0/1, and you see that. So let's type in the IP address. Sorry, it's 192.168.1.1. Then default subnet mark is 255.255. It has a default subnet mark .0. all right, so same for the first interface. I do my no shutdown and I change the state. No shutdown, and I change my state to up, and I save my running config. All right, so I copy my running config to my startup config. Alright, so we've configured the IP address subnet marked for the two interfaces on our router. The next thing to do after you've configured is to save the running config. Okay, so that's what I just did. Alright, so we're ping successful and it's playing. So let's now ping to our PC and let's see the outcome. So now you can even see over here that that's green check mark to the router, meaning when we ping it's supposed to be successful. Alright, so I'm in PCA, and if I ping to the router, alright, or if from there I'm in the router, if I ping to PC A, supposed to be successful. Alright, so when I ping to PCA, which is 192.168.1.3. Alright, so we have a success message over here, and that's that. Alright, so the next thing to do is to configure the switch. So I close this tab. So for the switch, the first thing is to console into the switch and enable privilege exec mode. Mostly the router and the switch has similar commands that we use. So I move my console cable to my switch and I select my console and I enter into the terminal, leave everything as default like the router, and now I'm in my switch. Alright, so the first thing here to do is so I've consoled into the cable, enable privilege exec mode. Alright, so enable. Alright, then enter configuration mode. Alright, so that's B. So I enter into the configuration mode. That's configure terminal. Alright, so I'm now in my configuration mode. The next thing to do is to assign a device name. So according to my addressing table, the host name is S1. Alright, so I'll have to change this switch to S1. Similar to what we did for the router, I'll change this to S1. So the command to use here is host name, then S1. Alright, so I've changed my switch to S1 as the host name. The next thing is to assign class as the privilege exec encrypted password. Alright, so enable secret, then class. Alright, then assign Cisco as the console password and enable login. Alright, so to assign Cisco as the console password, I move to my line console 0, then my password is Cisco. Alright, then I enable login. Alright, now we are to encrypt the plain text password. So encrypting the password, we use the service password encryption. Alright, so let me move out of service password encryption. Alright, so I'm now encrypted my password. I'm supposed to create a banner that wants anyone accessing the device that unauthorized accesses. So similar to what you did for the switch, that's what will be similar to what you did for the router. Sorry. So banner method of the day, or is it method? Message of the day, sorry. Message of the day starts with my delimiter. Unauthorized access is prohibited. Unauthorized access is prohibited. Alright, and I end with my delimiter. Alright, the next thing is to configure the IP address for the switch VLAN interface, but let me save my running config. So I end this session and I copy my running config to my startup config. Alright, I don't want to lose any data now. So configure terminal. Okay, so we move to the VLAN interface for the switch. So my addressing table, my switch, we have the VLAN 1. IP address is this, subnet mark is this, and the default gateway is this. Alright. So now I move to my interface, then VLAN 1. Alright, so I'm in my interface. So you can see here config interface, it's here. Then I configure the IP address and the subnet mark, and I activate the interface as well. Alright, so the IP address is 192.168.1.2. Alright, so IP address 192.168.1.2. Then my subnet mark is 255.255.255.0. Alright, so that's it, and I configure my default gateway. So IP default gateway, so IP default gateway is 192.168.1.1. Alright, so that's it. And what do we have next? Save the running config to the startup config. Alright, so I exit out of this and I copy the running config to the startup config. Alright, and for that we are done with configuring the switch, and when you check our completion, we are 87% done. The part 2 is just to display device information. Alright, so what we do, the first thing is just show the version. So show version will just show the review the hardware and software information of the network. So if we just do show version, this is just a command we are just using to verify something. So that's it. You can see the iOS image file and that. Alright, so for part 3 we have to secure remote access to the router. So I close this. Okay, so the first thing is to set the IP domain name and generate secure keys on the router. So I move to my router again. I select my console, then I secure, or I set the IP domain name. So I move to my terminal. Okay, alright, so enter. Alright, so it's asking me for my password, meaning we've secured it. What we did previously actually paid off. Alright, so I entered my password, which was Cisco, if you remember. Now I'm in the router. When I move to a higher exec mode, you see that it prompts me for my password, which, if you remember, it's class. Alright, so now I'm in my router and I generate I set the IP domain name first. So IP domain name given us is academy.net. So that's what we do. So I move into my configure mode or my config mode. So configure terminal. Alright, so I set my IP domain name to be academy.net. Alright, then I generate my RSA keys with 1024 key length. Alright, so I use my command crypto. Alright, crypto key generate. Alright, then I generate my RSA key. Alright, so it prompts me for the length and I type 1024 as the length, the key length. Alright, nice. So when we see our completion, we are 92% done. It's left with just 8%. When we check our results, you can see that in the assessments we've completed all these tasks, and it's left with just something small to do over here, and we'll come back to verify it later. So let me close this. Let me expand this one. Alright, so let's see what we were left with to do, and let's just do it before. So I move to my check results assessment, and you can see here that usernames is not configured over here. So that's the virtual line, the virtual terminal line. Alright, and the port status for the VLAN for the switch is also down. Okay, so that's what we need to do. So let me move to my switch over here. Select the console terminal, leave everything as default. Alright, so I move to my interface line and I make the state up. Alright, so config or configure terminal. Alright, so interface VLAN 1. Alright, so no shutdown. Alright, so I've changed the state to up, and let's verify the status of the state. So I move to check results assessment, and yes, now I can see that the switch the status is up. Alright, so what I'm left to do is the virtual terminals for our router. Alright, so I close this as well, and I expand this. Okay, so let's connect PC1. So I select my command prompt and let's see. So I move to my router. Terminal. Okay. Alright. So I'm in my config mode, and I create an SSH, a secure user, and I configure the virtual terminal lines for SSH access. All right, we can use telnet, but telnet is not secure. This SSH is S secure shell, right? It's secure. That's why it's called secure shell, obviously. So I type in I create a username. All right, then SSH user, then the password is Cisco, so secret, then Cisco. All right, so I've created a user whose name is SSH user. Then now I move to my virtual terminal lines. So line VTY, so sorry, line VTY, and you can see that I have from 0 to 15, but I'll do from 0 to 4, and I would enable local login. All right, okay, so local login, yeah, you use the local username database for login credentials. All right, so login local. All right, so now we are done. The next thing to do is to use SSH. So SSH, so I transport my input to SSH. All right, then I end this section and I save the running config. So copy running config. So the shortcuts to type in all this, I can just write copr, then running config to st. All right, so that's copr space st means copy the running config to the startup config. That would save me a lot of time from instead of typing the whole thing. All right, so now that I'm done, you see that our completion is marked 100% and we are done. So let's verify SSH. So I move to my PCA and let's verify if we can actually remote access our router. All right, so I move to the command prompt and let's see. So if I do SSH -l, all right, then my username SSH user, then 192.168.1.1. It's prompting you for my password, and you know that the password is Cisco. All right, so now we've entered the router and our banner message unauthorized access is prohibited warning as displayed, which shows that we've successfully configured our switch and our router, and yes, we are good to go. So it's marked 100% and we are done. When we check our results, we see that everything has been configured, and yes, so that's pretty much everything. How to configure, how to build a switch and router and configure them. So to verify, let's just create a simple, let's enter a simulation mode and let's send packets from PCA to PCB, whether it actually works. All right, okay, so in my simulation mode, I just select this, the one which is like an envelope, and my source is my PCA and my destination is my PCB. All right, so as you can see here, it states in progress. So I just forward it and see, forward it, forward it, forward it, forward it, forward it, forward it, and you see that it's successful. All right, so we can successfully move from A to B. Thank you. All right, so in this packet tracer activity, we just build a switch and a router network given our addressing table, and we've been able to do that successfully.